Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. I'm a psychological astrologer as well as an analytical hypnotherapist. And today I am quite excited because I have got Nicholas Pearson with me, who knows so much about crystals. And in fact, he has written this nifty little guide, which I keep close to me when I want to look things up. So Crystal Basics, the Pocket Encyclopedia. Hello, Nicholas.
Hello, thank you so much for having me back on the show.
It's a pleasure, and especially to talk about crystals. For people who are new to crystals, what, why are they important?
I mean, for the most basic level, they're the foundation of everything here on Earth. It's the makeup of what's all around us and the ground beneath our feet, but it's also what we use to build our homes and extract valuable ores to use in our devices and transportation and other technology. There's nowhere we can be and not be supported by crystals. So, for the longest part of human history, we've had a really intentional relationship with that. And in the modern day, I think we kind of take for granted that we have stuff all around us and we forget where it comes from. So I've always had a profound love for rocks and minerals, and they have supported my life in a number of ways, both mundane and more mystical. And I'm hoping with something like the Pocket Encyclopedia, I can breathe new magic into the world all around us and see those geological wonders lurking around every corner.
It's interesting that you talked about the way in which, well, you're talking about crystals and minerals as being one and the same thing. And I think people think of crystals as things like gemstones, for instance, not necessarily minerals.
Yeah, so why don't we break down what some of these terms might mean? So a crystal, as we define it by material science, is a substance that is homogeneous, which means it's more or less the same ingredients all the way through. And it also has a repeating and symmetrical structure. And that structure is what we call a lattice, a crystal lattice. So there are crystals everywhere. There are crystals in our body. There are crystals in the foods we eat. There are crystals in the earth and in space and everywhere in between. But very specifically, when we have a naturally occurring inorganic crystal, we end up with something called a mineral. So, all those gemstones we think of, like sapphire and ruby and emerald and quartz and amethyst, of course, they are crystalline. So they check that box, but they're also minerals. When we get minerals that come together, when they aggregate, we end up with something called a rock. So there are some common rocks that we might already be familiar with, like granite and chalk and limestone and marble. But there are also rocks that we use in gem therapy and crystal healing. Things like nephrite jade is a metamorphic rock, an admixture of actinolite and tremolite. We've got stuff like ruby and zoisite, another rock. Lapis lazuli, very famous rock, not a single mineral, but a mixture of three primary ones with as many as a dozen or more accessory minerals that can be found within it. So understanding what these terms are and what they mean can shed a little bit of light on the kind of energetic relationship too. Rocks are made out of minerals. Minerals themselves are crystals that are made out of the elements on the periodic table. So we can think about these building blocks that kind of level up, so to speak. And they are important distinctions to make, because if we work with, a single mineral, perfect, flawless piece of quartz, it has a kind of laser-like precision to it, not just a physical clarity, but an energetic clarity, because it's just one substance through and through. But if we pick up a rock like this spotted dolerite or a piece of granite, then we have a mixture of energies in them. So we get a kind of difference between, if we make an analogy to music, that single mineral, that single crystal is like a solo instrument or a single voice. But when we pick up a rock, we have an ensemble. It's a whole orchestra. And that doesn't make one better than the other. They're just suited to different things, we might say.
It's a beautiful thing to think of it in those terms because it highlights the extent to which our very essence as human beings is connected with the earth, because we know where we need minerals in order to be healthy. Certain minerals need to be in our bodies. We know that minerals need to be put back into the soil if we're going to have healthy food, to make us healthy. So there's this very intimate relationship between us and, let's call it, the very bones of the earth.
Absolutely. And there are so many components of the body that are crystalline or semi-crystalline in nature. We've got calcium phosphate crystals in our teeth and bones that give them structure. We've got little iron oxide magnetite molecules inside our brains. We've got phospholipids that are semi-crystals. We have water throughout the body that exists ideally in what's called a liquid crystal mesophase, that kind of state of both liquidity and crystal at the same time. And we're literally made of crystals from head to toe, and we're chock full of the same potential that we find when we pick up our favorite healing crystal or gemstone.
So this is, I guess, a good point at which to go from this bones of the earth to the next question, which would be, how is it possible that we can be talking about them for healing?
So let's start talking about the really fundamental stuff, like energy in general. So, if we ask a metaphysician what energy actually means, what's the definition of that word, we get a very different answer than if we maybe talk to a physicist or an engineer. But energy is defined as the capacity to do work. It's a really vague answer on purpose because there's lots of different kinds of energy that we can map and measure and quantify in the realm of science. But oftentimes in the healing arts, what we're doing is we're talking about subtle energy, the kind of supposed or presupposed energy that we can't yet measure. Maybe one day we'll come up with a sophisticated enough instrument and the right kind of scale to quantify it, but we're not there yet. But to understand how subtle energy works, we have to understand how measurable ordinary energy works. And energy is a state, a capacity that can be transferred from one system to another, and we can measure its performance or its effects in one way or another. So when we talk about crystal healing, we're talking about a kind of energy medicine. Now, it might be a subtle kind of energy, but we have to assume that those subtle energies play by the same rules as the ones we can measure. So I like to look towards electromagnetism to give us a lot of good models for how this works. And, at the end of the day, most of the measurable energies that we deal with in our day-to-day life fall somewhere on that electromagnetic scale. And, everything around us is generating these kind of very weak, sometimes very strong electromagnetic fields. Every fiber of the carpet beneath your feet, every molecule in your body, every bit of air that you take in is full of this kind of energetic potential, and the kinds of energy fields generated by substances and phenomena are a reflection of their makeup. So I, as a biological organism, am not super coherent, energetically speaking. That's because I'm not the same substance all the way through. My brain is made out of different bits of stuff than, my larynx or my bones or my ears, necessarily, because they have different functions. But, if I pick up a piece of quartz like this citrine, it's made out of the same stuff all the way through. So when its little particles begin to dance, which they're always doing, all matter is essentially mostly empty space full of little bits that are in constant movement. But the regular, precise nature of crystals causes the movement of those particles and the fields they generate through that movement to be a lot more organized than anything in my body will be, at least taken as a whole. So when we get two energies that come into contact with another, if they're similar enough, they go through this process called entrainment. And entrainment relies upon a kind of louder energy field, we'll say, one that has a higher amplitude, to use technical terms. And that higher amplitude or louder energy field draws the lesser field into harmony with it through this process of entraining it or harmonizing or synchronizing it. So when we take any crystal and bring it into our energy field, then what is beginning to happen is we're learning on a subtle energetic level to become more crystalline, more coherent, more organized. And there are plenty of rich and robust data-driven studies that tell us that when certain parts of our energy field that we can measure become more coherent, we tend to experience states of health. The biggest thing that science has measured, that medicine has measured, is heart-brain coherence. So these are the two primary drivers of the body's electromagnetic fields. And when they sync up, we tend to experience positive mental affect, lower stress levels, our metabolic functions improve. There are all sorts of ways that we see that there's a relationship here. So imagine if that's true on the measurable, it also has to be true on the subtle. And if I can somehow become more coherent, more crystalline on that energetic level, then it stands to reason it's going to affect my mental affect, things like mood, perception, how I feel. We know that the way we feel triggers changes in the pathology of our bodies through neurotransmitters, both chemical and electrical in nature, which cascade through our entire system. So eventually we get to this point where energy transcends pathology by starting on the most subtle level and gradually working its way toward the physical body. And that's a way for explaining how crystals may heal us.
I was just thinking about the electromagnetic aspect that you were talking about. The very fact that that is measurable, I think, is quite something.
Absolutely. Now, it's not something we can necessarily measure very well, very easily, or in our backyards, but there are sophisticated devices that can measure things like heart-brain coherence and detect subtle, very, very, very quiet energy fields. These are devices like the superconducting quantum interference device, they call them SQUIDs for short, which takes up a whole room. You have to have a massively insulated area to prevent outside interference from other signals because it is so sensitive. And there are some really promising studies that demonstrate how susceptible our electromagnetic fields are to outside influences with tools like this and other ones. And a lot of this corroborates what we see and experience and feel in the subtle, the psychic, and the spiritual realms.
So that is an actual demonstration of the fact that our bodies respond to external influences. Our own energy fields respond to external influences, and that's very exciting. And I really like what you were talking about, in terms of one energy training another. So it means that the stronger has more influence over the other.
Yeah, think of it as it's kind of like tuning an instrument. We have to know what the pitch is that we're aiming for, and ideally, if we're trying to listen to it, it should be louder than the instrument itself, or at least be more detectable. So in the case of working with something like a crystal, a gemstone, a rock, a humble mineral, then those are putting out very precise frequencies, very precise, if we want to make that musical analogy, a specific pitch. And if it is loud enough, we can adjust because we can hear it through all the white noise of life and begin that process of course correction to come back into a state of balance.
So who is training who? I'm holding a clear quartz crystal. And so am I having any influence on the crystal, or is it just the crystal having influence on me?
Well, I definitely take a very relational view of the universe, of our place in it. And, there's no one-way street. When we talk relationships, it's always a two or more party system. So yeah, we're definitely having an effect on our crystals, albeit not always a very coherent one. But one of the unique things about crystal lattices, we've so far talked about the hypothetically perfect structure of crystals, but in the real world, they are perfectly imperfect. If there were no imperfections in the mineral kingdom, we would have no brilliant red rubies or violet amethysts or green emeralds, because those colors come from imperfections. So, but where those kinds of imperfections exist, there's the potential for, think of it as like an empty space on a bookshelf. You can put something there. So energy, information, ideas, imprints can be stored in those little imperfections. So when we pick up a crystal, it is recording. Even when we're not near a crystal, it's still recording. Crystals have this kind of uh, perfect memory in the spiritual sense, in that they can hold on to or retain a small imprint, an echo of everything they experience, at least until we wipe that slate clean. So when we pick up a crystal, it's not just performing a function on us, but it's also remembering the relationship it's building with us. So it's definitely a two-way street. And it's that process of being able to record that is kind of the driver behind what people talk about when they talk about programming their crystals or charging them for a specific intent or purpose. It's why we need to cleanse our crystals regularly, because not everything that they record, not everything they imprint on or remember is necessarily aligned with those intentions or aligned with the goals we have in working with them. So good spiritual hygiene is an important part of that relationship, so we can make sure that we've got a clear focus on what's working for us.
So it begs the question, do my crystals recognize me?
So I think that's really something I can't answer for you, mostly because crystals don't have personalities in the way that we do. They don't have the same kinds of filters and biases that we've got. However, if we take a very animistic view, if we look at an inspirited world, maybe the spirit or the consciousness driven part of them certainly has a kind of recognition, being different to the energetic kind of memory we were just talking about.
I was also wondering, because we know that water has memory, and there have been amazing experiments that have demonstrated that water can actually, if you freeze water, show the image, or you can see the imprint of the image of the last thing that touched that water. So that's what made me wonder then, is that similar? Is that what's happening with crystals when we're talking about them having a memory and recording?
It's not exactly the same, because part of water's ability to do that is based on a unique kind of, we'll say, intermolecular bond called hydrogen bonds. That's how we get clustered, structured water. And with crystals, they already have a fixed structure. So water is actually able to reorganize itself in response to very, very weak sources of electromagnetism, including the electromagnetism caused by the molecules of a substance just existing. Crystals, on the other hand, they have this kind of fixed order. They can't rearrange themselves in response. So it's a different kind of mechanism at play. But I would posit that, our bodies are filled with this miraculous substance that is water, and therefore the molecules within us, about 70% by mass, but by molecular count, if you tally up all the molecules in the human body, because water molecules are extraordinarily tiny, the hydrogen is the smallest atom on the periodic table, and it's H2O, hydrogen and oxygen together. It takes about 99% or more by molecular count to equal 70% by volume or mass. So we're mostly a liquid crystal that has that kind of structural memory that organizes itself in response to those external forces. So crystals can influence us on that level. We don't necessarily influence them in the exact same way, because they have this fixed structure.
So let's go back to this idea of hygiene. Um, if I was to be a healer using crystals, would it be advisable for me to invite people to bring their own crystals with them? Or should I have different crystals for different people?
So, if we let's make an analogy here. Not to say I'm not going to equate these two things as being the same, but we're just going to look at it metaphorically. If we have to go to the hospital and have surgery performed, we don't have to bring our own scalpel, and the doctor doesn't have a different scalpel with a different patient's name on it for every procedure. They reuse them, but they get hermetically cleaned in between. They get absolutely sanitized of anything that could be there, and it's kind of the same energetically speaking. When we're working with crystals or other spiritual tools, we can practice good spiritual hygiene, so that way we don't have a little bit of the previous session carried over into the next, so we're not cross-contaminating the energy fields of people. In sessions that I've done with clients, absolutely people have brought crystals in that they would like to be part of that session. We still practice good spiritual hygiene on the tools they bring in. That's where the metaphor kind of breaks down a little bit. But just like we wash our hands before we prepare our meal, or after we get them dirty, we want to make sure that we're doing the same with our crystals and other healing tools. So we want to practice some sort of cleansing technique before a session, and then after we've worked with someone or ourselves to initiate a process of release or healing or transformation, cleanse afterwards to make sure that whatever has come up and is being released doesn't stick around in that perfect memory that crystals have.
So how do we cleanse them?
There's the question, right? There are so many viable options. There are a few that I like to use most frequently because they're safe for any and all crystals. But if we asked a group of 10 crystal lovers their absolute favorite way to cleanse crystals, we probably get 20 or 30 answers. So some people use sun, some use moon, some use salt, some use water, some use sound or smoke or dried flower petals, and the list goes on and on. But there are a few caveats. We should know that not all crystals are stable enough to go in water, that some can be damaged by salt, that some will bleach in sun. And the full moon is lovely, but it only happens once a month. And just like I really hope we wash our hands more than once a month, we probably need to cleanse our crystals more than once a month. So my favorite techniques are ones that I can use just about anywhere. Sound is wonderful. If you've got a fancy singing bowl or beautiful chimes or gongs, you can use them, but you could drum, you could clap, you could sing or chant or tone, as long as we do it with the requisite amount of intention and power behind it. We can use the breath, which is one of my favorite methods and is inspired by the work of Marcel Vogel, who's kind of like the grandfather of the modern crystal healing movement. We can also burn sacred herbs for cleansing. So, different plants might be available to us depending on where we live. But those are the three that I go to over and over again because they're safe for every kind of crystal. And if you know those three methods, then no matter where you are, you have at least one at your disposal. We can always use the breath. If we don't have the breath to use, our problem is not a piece of amethyst that needs cleansing. It's us. So I like that because it can also be discreet, and we don't have to worry about lighting a bundle of sage or setting something on fire in the office. We don't have to, have a singing bowl on our desk to be able to use it. We can just look like we're clearing our throat or blowing our nose or, having a deep sigh, whatever that breath might look like for us.
I like that. So imagine I have bought some new crystals and I haven't had the luxury of choosing them. So they've arrived in the post. And I want to tune them in or tune them into my energy, and I want to tune into their energy and they're new. What should I do?
There are a lot of great things we can do. My favorite exercise is one that doesn't look very much like an exercise. It's good because depending on how our brains are oriented, if we give our conscious mind a set of instructions and that set of instructions is easy and enjoyable, then we're likely to follow through on the rest. So I call this a crystal contemplation. Like if I have to give it a name, that's what it is. But one stone at a time, find the best lighting you've got available. If that's natural, if that's artificial, do whatever. These days, our mobile devices have great flashlights on them, so you can use them to get up close and personal in there. But look at it every which way in the light, see every angle, inspect every face. If you've got a natural stone, as long as it's not going to cut you or break the stone, get a feel for it in a tactile sense. If it's polished, feel all the different surfaces that might be involved. Feel the heft of it, the weight of it. Sometimes crystals have a kind of unique sound when we tap them or stroke them, or run our fingers across them. Not so much on this emerald, but certainly some quartzes have a kind of resonant or ringing quality. Flint can do that as well. So use all the senses that are safe and advisable. You might, on a rough specimen, get a whiff of the aroma of its matrix, but don't do that if it's a toxic mineral. Don't do that if it's flaking apart. Never lick your rocks. Please don't do that. But all the other senses are safe to use. And as we do this, we kind of build this lexicon related to the physical body of the stone. We understand what it looks like, more than just what color is it, but how does light pass through and reflect off the surface? What shapes are involved? And as we kind of recreate the image of that in our mind, as we build this intimate sensory model of what the crystal looks like, we're also internalizing its energy simultaneously. It's getting to know us. Now, crystals don't have that personal bias like we do. Any strong personality we feel is at least in part a little bit of projection. That's not to say the animating force or spirit doesn't have its own personality, but it's not like a human personality because they're not humans. But this little contemplation exercise is great because when you do this repeatedly with the same stone and with different stones, you can start to take inventory and go, wow, every time I hold this piece of citrine, I feel this kind of way. When I hold citrine generally, these are the trends. And we want to start to make sure that in the beginning, we're just oohing and awing over the crystal. Set no other expectation except to fall in love with it and get to know it. But what will end up happening is we start to notice the little impressions within us. And I have observed that if I teach people this and set the expectation that they have to take inventory of what's happening inside them, they're paying more attention to themselves than the rock. So put the focus on the rock, let the rest emerge quietly. And the more you practice, the more you start to see those trends. But it gives you a kind of language of your own personal dictionary of how crystals evoke feelings or images or other kinds of impressions within you. So that's a really great way to get started. And it doesn't sound like work. You get to just marvel at how beautiful something is.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So I think then just a reminder to everyone, the book that we are talking about is Crystal Basics, and it is a pocket encyclopedia, very handy. And I think a lovely way to introduce ourselves to a new crystal that we have just bought, and then develop that contemplative relationship and begin to tune in. Nicholas, thank you so much. I'll be putting a link to your book in the description box. If people wanted to find out more about you, what do they do?
So I'm online at theluminouspearl.com. You can also find me on social media at The Luminous Pearl, whether that's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. And I'm usually pretty responsive to messages on social media. So I do a lot of online and in-person events this summer in particular. I've got a lot of travel ahead of me. So I might be coming to a town near you if you're in the US. No more travel abroad until next year probably. But yeah, find me online, reach out with questions, and I hope everyone enjoys the book.
And if you are in the UK, Nicholas is often linked with the College of Psychic Studies, doing workshops there. So you can also find him there. On
Yes.
Zoom, of course. Oh, well, thank you again, Nicholas.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at the summer solstice. Until then, goodbye.